the thing that interests me the most in this series is the interdisciplinary connections between people who are in architecture, people who are in planning, people who are in development, maybe even people who are in building. And I know that left to themselves, architects have their own proclivities, planners have their conferences, and they have their own thing that they do. Developers, when they ever get together, uh, they have their own kind of thing going as well. So, uh, with that in mind, maybe you could start just by helping us get into the head of an urban planner. What are the things that motivate planners? And maybe give us the stereotypical description of what a planner is.
So then, your typical planner, I think, is somebody who uh, their main focus and drive is to see the city as a system. You know, they see this broad, interconnected web of roads, sidewalks, buildings, all these sort of things, and it's something that from the very beginning it interests them, but not from a standpoint of, say, the risk or the opportunity and capitalizing on that, you know, doing something on that like a developer would, and certainly not in the way that an architect would see a single building or see a single lot as an opportunity to express something. The really big problem, I think, with us as planners is we are so broadly our perspective is so wide, is so broad, so expansive that it's really hard for us, I think, at times to really think about things really in just a more pragmatic way. I mean, we have this desire of a utopia. You know, we have this desire of making these great, beautiful cities or these great, beautiful areas, and we don't necessarily realize that, hey, what you see as a broad system is really an interconnection of many different individual systems that just so happen to follow your rules of your zoning ordinance or whatever, but you know, they all have a lot of self-interest that are going to be conflicting with this broader goal that you always want to see accomplished. Another interesting thing to me that I've always noticed is that we don't have clients. You know,
That's an interesting difference.
yeah, we don't really have customers. I mean, you know, an architect someone's going to hire that person and they're going to do the
Right.
work. A developer is going to buy a piece of land and build it for a certain segment of a population, of a market. But we don't really have that sort of focus. In fact, if we do, it's even considered discriminatory. You know,
Right. Yep.
if we focus on just one particular part
Favoring
of
a
the
certain demographic. Yeah.
right demographic or even area. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's a social justice element where, you know, if we just focus on, you know, the suburb or
Mm-hmm.
the areas that are really growing economically, then we are doing that uh, despite or, you know, against what is needed for the underdeveloped or the disinvested core, let's say. And so, yeah, I mean, it's to think so broadly and to try to think in such a positive way, it really also creates for us this dilemma of who do we focus on the most, and that's always a constant debate. So we're a bunch of well-intentioned, neurotic people who are really just trying to make the best of everything, and that's a big challenge, of course, because who can make a perfect city? Who can make the best of literally everything? So,
If
but
only
we
people in
try.
all disciplines were so self-critical. So if I was at a planners conference and heard a group of planners start a conversation by saying the thing about developers is, how would they finish that sentence?
So it depends on the age of the planner, or rather the years of experience for the planner. If you're a young planner straight out of school, then you're going to say a developer is a profit mongering, environment destroying leech upon society. I mean, that really can, depending on the school, that can get ingrained very quickly for anyone because
Mm-hmm.
we all learn the prototypes, the archetypes of your Jane Jacobs who fought for the community, your Robert
Mm-hmm.
Moses who put urban freeways in the middle of town and destroyed, you know, or was going to destroy Greenwich Village. Later on in years, after you've done enough, worked with them enough, understood a little bit more about markets or about economies or just what their intent is, you start to realize what we consider as sprawl isn't, the creation of a bunch of megalomaniacal developers who forced that way of life on people. It's what people wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And you start to realize that developers, whoever they are, if the society wanted us to build giant pink pyramids as housing, then developers would build it. They are just, if anything, they're a representation
Right.
of what a
They're bringing
society
wishes to
wants.
expression. Yep.
Yeah, and so you start to understand that a little bit more. You start to see that their intent is to deliver what citizens want. 9 times out of 10, every developer wants to build something that lasts, wants to build something that is going to leave a mark, a legacy for their family or their community.
Right.
And then you start to see that, okay, yeah, these are good people who just want to do something. Oh, and by the way, they want to make money at it. That's not crazy.
Right. That brings us to a whole basket of ideas, which pertains to the course that you taught on Planetism that I took, which I really
Yeah,
enjoyed on form-based code. Maybe we can talk about that in a second. And
sure.
also this flashpoint of sorts that a developer wades into between previous zoning theory and
Yeah.
form-based code, and so a developer is kind of stepping into a planner's own internal discussion. But before we get to that, so form-based code, it sounds like something you use in JavaScript, but what is a form-based code?
It's a return back to a physical focus on planning. So zoning ordinances right now, anything in a zoning ordinance that you look at is going to be based on the idea of if we regulate the land use, then everything else can fall into place. We just don't want to see factories next to schools. We don't want to see hair shops, even barber shops next to homes.
Mm-hmm.
It's this idea that everything that's negative about what we see in the environment is predicated by the use and the combination of the wrong use with whatever is surrounding it. And so that was an idea that really only came about in the 30s, and of course it metastasized into this great big giant system that we now see with practically all of our
Right.
regulations in every city in the nation. But form-based code is saying, no, that's not right. I mean, people have been building cities for hundreds, thousands of years, and up until the 30s, no one really worried as much about land use. They worried more about the physical properties
Mm-hmm.
of development, the way you built the city, not the
Mm-hmm.
way you used it.
Mm-hmm.
And so form-based code goes back to that tradition, goes back to those ideas. I mean, don't get me wrong. Part of what zoning was about was that as we started to modernize and industrialize, we started to see smokestacks that never existed before.
Mm-hmm.
And so naturally, what do we do
New
about this? We
problem.
start
Yeah. Yeah.
right. But what's ironic is that is a design issue, meaning that's a form thing. So what's to say you can't have a factory next to a school if the factory has no smokestacks, no loud noises even. It does CNC machining, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it has maybe 2 employees, and they don't even receive big shipments during the week. In that case, that's less impact than, say, a 7-Eleven would have
Right.
next to
Yeah.
a school. Because a 7-Eleven, they're going to sell cigarettes next to a school
Mm-hmm.
and liquor and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so you start to look at things the way we did back when we first planned colonies here, back when we built things like Charleston and Savannah and Alexandria, and you start to think to yourself, yeah, it doesn't matter so much as we used to think what you use it for, but does it fit from this physical element, from this relation between one site to the next, and it's not a revolutionary idea. It's just really going back to those traditions.
So a developer reads. I'm reading what's it called? Sprawl repair right now. It's a
Yeah, yeah,
book.
yeah.
Fascinating.
Right.
Mostly illustrations, and this is
Yep.
this brings me to the pertinent point. So a developer reads Sprawl repair, says fantastic. You you deal with the issue of, well, I need this to be rezoned, or I need this to be changed, or I'm wanting to
Right.
demolish this thing that's here and put something new.
Right.
What does a planner, what does a developer need to know or keep in mind when broaching such a subject uh, with someone in the local planning department who maybe didn't graduate very recently, or
Yeah.
hasn't read sprawl repair, or
Right.
doesn't have this, whatever.
Um, it's really, really hard because everything that you see in sprawl repair, that book, is probably illegal in 80% of zoning ordinances in America.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it just goes back to this fact of, if you've been enforcing the same old zoning code, in Plymouth Falls, Rhode Island, for the past 20 years, and it's the same one that they built all that stuff with, then you can't rightfully do the things in sprawl repair that are meant to fix what that book created. So if I were a developer and I were going to that local planning office and I was showing them, hey, I want to take half of this parking lot. This is the classic of sprawl repair, right?
Right.
I want to take half of this parking lot and build a new, I don't know, shallow 5 tenant building, right here at the front, bring it right up to the street. Maybe even put some patio furniture on the front, right in front of this highway here, as crazy as that sounds. And I'm going to violate all of your setbacks, all of your height requirements, all of your parking regulations, and I'm going to also probably violate your use requirements too for this area. What do you say? If you were to do that in a place that has a very downtrodden economy right now, which there's not many of those right now, of course, thankfully. But you'd probably find a planner who would be uncertain about that, but a council who would be in favor. I mean, this happened to me in so many cases on the flip side, where people would want to build very poor, shoddy development, but as much as I didn't like it, the council, because they were so eager for jobs, development, growth, they would
Understandably.
approve it. Right. So in that case, you're probably okay. But if it's a hot market, if it's a market where the citizens have voted in a zoning ordinance and a council to make sure that everything looks the same all the time, you're not going to get very far probably, because I think a lot of developers know this. It's not so much the local planning office that's going to be your obstacle as it is the councils and commissions that are going to vote on these things. And, some communities,
Who are even farther removed from planning theory and the
that's
latest
exactly right.
conversation.
That's exactly right. And so that's going to be your greatest obstacle. A lot of your planning offices, even that guy who's been doing the same old conventional zoning for the past 20 years, if they see the benefit, and chances are you can talk to them of that benefit in a way that resonates. I mean, whether it's in the idea of, hey, you've got enough parking here, let's rejuvenate, or hey, let me show you this book. This is from planning. I mean, this is what we're talking about here. That
Right.
person's probably going to be okay. It's really going to be those commissioners, those counselors who, if people come into that meeting from the public and say, well, this sprawl repair is going to increase traffic, and then that's just a dangerous thing. Well, then it's going to get voted down. That's the bigger obstacle. It's this idea of we must preserve all traffic patterns exactly as they are. It's this idea that we must constantly do everything possible to increase property values, which means in a lot of risk-averse places, let's do exactly what we've been doing. And those are the bigger obstacles. The more I really think about it, it's not going to be the planner. It's going to be whatever that community's mindset is. If they're hungry for development, if they know they need jobs, no sweat, you'll be fine. But if it's that tight bedroom community where they've had the same stuff forever and their property values are still going up and people still want to be there, then they're going to say, no, you have to follow these rules exactly, because that's the thing that got us here. That's the thing that's going to keep us going. And that's that risk aversion that's really going to be a developer's biggest challenge.